Hey guys, System 5 here. You can call me Leo. Welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to talk about my latest continuous mix album release called brancher. Brancher is a French verb which means to connect or to plug in. So the album is going to be electrically themed, as all of my albums have some theme. This particular one is 150 beats per minute throughout. So it's pretty fast paced, but obviously still, in my style, very spacey, fairly chill. The primary sort of subgenre is Psytrance, which is a form of trance that kind of originated in the early noughts out of Israel. And it's known for kind of very positive, but very sort of hypnotic, a lot of repetition, obviously, we'll get into that in a minute, but form of trance. So not dark, not at least the styles that I appreciate and that I do. Not a lot of vocals or samples. For me, it's a lot of pads, a lot of synths, typical instrumental for me. And just really hard driving beat. You'll hear a lot of bass lines in this subgenre that are in the form of kind of KBBB, where it's like a kick drum followed by three bass beats. So obviously that's a very sort of fundamental style. I vary that quite a bit, but that's the idea, is that you have a constant sort of driving bass line that's choppy, that's not so much like long bass lines. And then I kind of sprinkled a couple of surprises into this particular mix, which includes some drum and bass, a couple of tracks. So even though they're still very trancey and spacey. So let's get into it. So you can, of course, the album is available on all streaming platforms. You can click the links below this video to find your favorite version, your favorite platform. You can listen to the tracks individually, or you can just play it through, which is the way that I would do it, especially if you wanted to just kind of focus on something or invoke flow, which is one of the main motivations for why I make music to begin with. So you can listen to it loud, you can listen to it quietly while you're doing something else. It's just really cool instrumental music that kind of fits, whatever mood you're in. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. I'll kind of talk about the different tracks and the motivation, the theme behind them. So, and then just another point of emphasis, this is my final, let's say analog or hardware based production. So I'm actually switching to a pure software form for 2025. It's a little bittersweet because with this sound module and some of the gear, you get that really old school sound, which I like. A lot of old school synths and so forth. But I've realized that, first of all, I travel a lot. I'm on the go. My day job requires me to, for example, go to Europe every few weeks. So I like to do a lot of stuff on my laptop, and I like to actually compose and arrange on my laptop while I'm on a flight. And it's kind of hard to do that when you have to lug gear with you. If I can just do it on my laptop, that's great. And second, software synths have gotten incredibly good in the last few years. So when my first experience with them, it goes back to like the late 90s, which is kind of when I started with all this stuff. And I remember being super impressed. In fact, what really kind of got me into this using software to begin with was a tool called Rebirth RB338 by Steinberg. Basically, this was all software based, two Roland TB303s for acid bass lines, and one Roland TR808, which is their super classic drum machine that's used in pretty much like all house music, especially earlier stuff, as well as trance and so forth, and all the subgenres. So this was kind of a software deck that had, the two 303s and the 808. So you could actually make some pretty cool stuff with it. Obviously, you're not going to necessarily make a full track unless you're talking about purely acid house stuff from like, Detroit and say the late 90s or early 90s, I should say. But really nice, really good for me, good introduction to step sequencing and filters and things of that nature. And then obviously from there I graduated to a DAW, digital audio workstation, which I do everything on now. But Rebirth was kind of that introduction for me. But as good as it was, I could very much tell that it was going to be, not quite like the real thing. obviously. Of course, when I started, even back then, getting your hands on a 303 was, like a house mortgaging type of event, assuming you could find one that worked. And now, forget it. I mean, you're not going to find any of this vintage gear. There's plenty of clones out there, but frankly, the software is so good that unless you have superhuman hearing, which I don't, it's really hard to tell the difference between the software generated stuff and the actual sort of traditional analog stuff. Now, of course, the analog gives you a bit more unpredictability. So you have some, you have electrical noise, you have things that kind of, alter the sound a bit. And these are things that we appreciate when we listen to analog recordings. But at the end of the day, you can simulate a lot of the effects using automation filters and so forth, automation lanes, I should say. And frankly, the software, since I'm already using software to actually control everything, it just made sense to make that jump to the software synth. And what it's doing is it's opening a whole new palette of sound for me, because instead of having, this one sound module, now I have basically an infinite amount of software synths that I can choose from. Quite a few really interesting things out there that are that I'm just getting exposed to, which are kind of a new generation of software synths. They're not trying to emulate an analog one, which is actually really interesting. And that allows us to create some very new sounds that are totally different. I still like the old school vintage sound, and a lot of my music is still going to be heavily focused on that, but I will incorporate some things that I simply can't do with the hardware that I have today. So with that said, Branche is the last album that I've produced, or tracks that I produced on this trusty 30-year-old Roland SC88 Pro. So it's a bit bittersweet, but I think I'm moving on to bigger things now. So let's get into it. Branche is 9 tracks. It's just under an hour. Obviously, they're a continuous mix, but you can also, you can listen to the singles. So I release all the tracks as singles as well. Also, they're on the, you'll find the links, but they're on the same streaming platforms. So we'll start with the opening track, Positive Charge. Here, what I wanted to do was make something that was, that was upbeat and positive, and hence the name Positive Charge, but without really any breaks. I wanted to put a good 6-7 minutes of music together where you were just zoning and listening to constant beats. So there's no actual breakdown. So most of my tracks, especially trance and house, are going to be a build, blow up, breakdown, fade out type of situation. So you'll have a long kind of 3-minute build depending on the type of music. You'll have a breakdown that lasts somewhere between, say, 1 and 2 minutes, where kind of the synths are taken apart and kind of played back in a different way, and just creates a really spacey sort of intermission. And then it blows up and drops into an actual, another beat section, which is a lot like the first kind of the end of the build, but incorporates some new sounds, some variations. And then, of course, I love the fade out part, just kind of writing that last minute of the song where you kind of take it apart, you take the beat out, and you just kind of let it, just kind of disappear in a really pleasing way. Where Positive Charge is pretty much, it's build, beat, and then fade out at the end, but there is no actual break. So you can hear, the general sound is something like this. So you hear that KBBB. There's a good kind of 16-bar section for you. So that's Positive Charge. And then it mixes into the next track, which is called NPN. So let's go ahead. And here you'll hear again, this is a hard driving track, really kind of constant bass line, cool beat. But it definitely has breakdown sections. So for example, here's kind of the section that blows up into a breakdown. take the drums away, just let it calm down a little bit. And then I did something really interesting here, which I don't always do with breakdowns. Which is that. That's kind of going back into a beat, but it's a softer beat. It's not quite as busy as the beginning of the track. Then of course it blows up again and just goes into like a full, sort of ensemble at the end with a proper fade out. So I really like this track. NPN is it's an NPN transistor, so negative, positive, negative. It's a transistor theme. So again, it's back to the electrical theme, and that's where I got the name for this track. So moving on. Next, I thought, okay, it'd be pretty cool to make a track that features bells as just a really prominent part of the harmony and melody, let's say. So I did some reading and I thought, okay, I love the French language. I'm learning French, so I like to use some French words. So I discovered, just by doing some research, like what are some really kind of interesting bell type instruments that maybe I wasn't familiar with, and the carillon came up. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but it's basically like a tower of bells that you play with levers and stuff. And these are completely obsolete instruments, right? I mean, they're probably 70, 80 years since they've actually been used. So le carillonneur is the French word meaning the guy who plays the carillon, right? So, and my particular album art, as you'll see, is actually an alien, but that's okay. You can think of it as an alien who likes this instrument, right? So what I wanted to do is make this a bit less intense than NPN, a bit more spacey, a bit more melodic, and that's where kind of the bell idea came in. And what you'll hear is, see if we can find a place, maybe here. So those are bells. Those are bells. That track a lot. It's definitely not quite as like Psytrance-y, let's say. It's more kind of a melodic, spacey track. But again, it's the kind of music that I like to listen to. So I only make stuff that I like to listen to. Sorry, but anyway, I really like this track, and I thought it was in a good place in the album. So moving along, the next track, track 4, is actually called 80 Ohm. This is definitely more of like a kind of a club type track, and much more intense than Le Carillonneur. So if we go into like a section here. Again, you can hear that choppy bass line. So I like this kind of the end of the build, the initial build. There's another element in this track that I really like, which is, and I intend to do a lot more of, which is basically the way to bring back the beat instead of, let's say after 16 bars, it's, and then you blow it up, right? You have your snare roll and so forth. It's really tempting to just like throw the hard beat right back on. But what I like to do, and you hear this in a lot of tracks, is kind of like have a few bars, like say 4 bars or 8 bar, maybe 2 or 4 bars of like an electronic sort of like effect or melody or something that doesn't have a beat, and then boom, the beat comes in. So you'll hear that. This is kind of the end of the breakdown. So you can see that right here, if we go into like where does the breakdown actually end. So the snare roll is here, and then right here is where you would expect the kind of the hard beat to come in, but instead I gave it like I think it's 2 bars of just kind of an electronic effect. So I took 2 bars out of the 16 bar beat section, part of the loop that it is, but it's a really cool way to bring back the beat, and I really like doing that. It's sometimes hard to pull off, and again, I don't want it to sound like like too cliche or whatever when I make it. So it's got to be part of like some interesting. So for example, in this case, the acid line goes up, and then it starts. I basically turn the filter cutoff down as it's coming down. Then I throw in the kind of that little electronic melody, and boom, then the beat right after it. So I think that's really cool. I really like that. So the next track, which is my second favorite track on the album, and you'll see I kind of saved the best for last, is called Transform. Oh, by the way, 80 ohm, I forgot to mention. So 80 ohm is the impedance of studio grade headphones. So they have a higher resistance, so they're harder to drive. And that's why when you wear a pair of studio headphones that are, and I'm talking about wired headphones here, not Bluetooth, when you play them with any device, they normally sound a lot quieter than kind of typical headphones do, because they have a lot more resistance. So you need to drive more power to them to get them. But like the Bayer Dynamics that I use for everything they're just so fantastic. It's a 30-year-old pair of DT150s, but they're amazing, and they're 80 ohm, of course. And so the other part of the 80 that's significant is that this was the 80th track that I wrote in 2024. So it just made sense to call it 80 ohm. So that's the name of that track. So next track is called Transform. And again, this is my second favorite track on the album. And interestingly enough, my 2 favorite tracks are kind of drum and bass type tracks. But again, we're not talking about the drum and bass where it's like really hard hitting, choppy, like, a lot of samples, a lot of snares, things like that. This is still very transient and melodic to a great extent, but it has that like breaking beat, a little bit jungly, but without being too busy with the snare, so you can actually kind of hear and feel the music. So do a reset. Some other thing I wanted to do with the software synth is actually reset it. So anyway, this starts, and I don't know if you can hear that on the video, but it starts with a very deep sort of organ bass line. And here's kind of the initial part of the beat. Oops. Oh, what I wanted to do with this track is, as far as the melody goes, I wanted to use like a really cool, and I think I pulled it off, like a late 80s style polysynth, arpeggiated. And I pulled it off, I think, so it's kind of a really cool sort of late 80s sound synth, melody, which you'll hear here on top of the bass. And you kind of hear that filter cutoff go up at the end, which is awesome. I like it. Here comes the beat. So you can hear it's a breaking beat, but it's not a pure jungle sort of drum set. It's using like a 909 drum set, so it still has a very sort of dry kick to it. So it's still trancey. It's not going to be like a pure drum and bass type track, let's say. But what I really love about this track what I really love is the, where is it? I think it's here. This part. And this goes on for several minutes. So there's your 32-bar preview. You're going to have to listen to the whole track if you want to hear it. But what happens to me when I listen to that section, and that goes on for a few minutes, for 2 or 3 minutes, is you just completely zone out. It's just so, I mean, if you're trying to like, you know, so I've used this on my headphones while doing a PowerPoint, and I'm just like, just so dialed into what I'm doing. You know, and again, you want to play it at a lower volume so you can still think, let's say, and not just totally trance out. But I just hear like this. It's repetitive, but there's key changes, there's octave changes, there's layers coming in and out, there's acid going up and down. So it's not really, I mean, it's changing constantly, but it's subtle, and it just kind of puts you in that, like, you know, that flow that you're looking for. I love it. I love that part of the track, and it's one of my favorite. Like I said, it's my second favorite track on the album, and we'll get to my first favorite one later. So moving on. Piezoelectric meditation. So when something's piezoelectric, it means that electricity makes it do some physical thing. So for example, a buzzer, like an old school buzzer that you would hear, like, you know, that's not purely electronic, right? That's like an actual device. It's called piezoelectric. You give it an electric current and it like vibrates and makes noise. And that's what the term piezoelectric means. So meditation, it's maybe a bit of a misnomer. The track's a bit more intense than what you'd want to meditate to. But from a sort of Psytrance perspective, it's very chill, relatively speaking. So there's that choppy bass again, and this one's actually arpeggiated. Arpeggiated, excuse me. So. Heartbeat, but not super busy, so you can still kind of chill to it. And then the other thing I did with this track, which was kind of new for me, is using an arpeggiator session that's more configuration. That's kind of holding notes longer. You can hear that kind of higher melody part. Short break on this one. And I kind of like to introduce something during the break, taking the beats away. So I introduce like a nice acid sort of flow to it. And then another cool part of the track, which I really like, is introducing this sequence bass played at a higher pitch as kind of a change up from the melody. So here, it happens later. track too. It's after Transform. So again, I curated this whole thing, right? So when you listen to it, the whole program makes sense. After Transform, which Transform was such a hard-hitting beat, given that kind of drum and bass sort of background, I wanted to have something a little tiny bit softer, but again, not take you out of flow, let's say. So this was, what I came up with. So moving on to track 7, this is track 6. This track is called Alternating Currents. Again, it's electrical theme, but it's currents with an S, so it's more like ocean currents, but alternating current is an AC, it's an electrical topic, so I thought the name was kind of cool. And this track is something very interesting. It actually configures the sound module to support 2 drum kits and 16 channels instead of 1, used by sending a system exclusive message. So here's where I started using, I chose to use for the first time on this set the gong, which I love using the gong instead of like a crash cymbal for every 16th. I just love the way the gong sounds. That hard-hitting sort of like reset sound with like a long tail off and reverb. It's just absolutely awesome. This track has a bit of it's an FM bass line, so it's still choppy, but it's not like an acid like a JP8. It's more like almost like a slap bass, but electronic. So. And then, of course, kind of for me, the highlight is the gong. Track is super trancey. It's got that sort of that the repetition, but all the layers coming in and changing all the time, and I just love it. It's probably the tranciest track on this album. So moving on to the next track is called Potential Difference. Also uses 2 drum kits, but not the gong in this case. And potential difference is an electrical term which means voltage. Voltage and potential difference are interchangeable. So I thought that was a cool name. And love this track. What I did here is on this track I kind of take the bass line and make it more of a harmonic melodic element, especially later on. So you can hear that sort of like choppy bass line there. You'll hear at the end of this 16-bar section what I do with it, and it's kind of a prelude to the end. So it's actually 2 bars of climb and followed by 2 bars of drop on the frequency filter. And what happens is when I kind of for the blow up part at the end, now this track. It's fairly simple, especially compared to what's coming. And what's coming is, as I've alluded to, it's my absolute favorite track on the album. And this track is called RMS. Also uses gongs, which I love. RMS stands for root mean square, which is the sustained wattage that is used this way. Sustained wattage that an amplifier can push to a set of speakers without distorting. So there's peak wattage and then there's RMS. So if you remember from my old car stereo days, that it was a great way to judge an amp, is what was the RMS wattage. And this is basically, if you go above that level of power on that particular amp, you're going to start getting distortion. So what is that sustained, level that it can do? And I thought that was a cool name for the track. So this track is a drum and bass track. This is my absolute favorite track on the album, but it features actually only like 2 minutes of drums total in the 6+ minute track. It's all about builds and sort of like, fade outs and transitions. I absolutely love it. It's something that I can listen to on loop, but basically it's just such a sweet build. It's so spacey, but it's got such interesting elements to it. So moving on to the actual beat part, which happens like 3 minutes or 2 minutes and 8 seconds into the track. My favorite part coming up right here. Take the drum and the bass away. Just love the space. Then I switch the main sort of lead synth. I crossfade it to like an arpeggiated one, which is totally awesome. All while the acid keeps going up and down. Love this track. I love the end. It's such a fitting, it's a closing track to the set. So that when the track actually unwinds, it unwinds the entire set. It's a long sort of 40-bar ending with no drums and no bass. And it's just basically just like, space kind of coming apart at the end. It's absolutely awesome. I encourage you to listen to it. Like I said, I can listen to it on loop. But again, that's just me. So anyway, hope you enjoy the album, and thanks for watching. And please subscribe if you're interested in learning more about this or interested in my journey. I'll be doing these types of videos all the time, and of course, releasing music. I have some big plans for 2025, so I hope that you're a part of the journey. Thanks again. Bye.